Hey everybody, it's been a long time since I did a video. We're inside the Cal 20 finally, and let me kind of show you what I've been working on. So I'm gonna give you a view down into the back there. So you can see those two bulkheads are new. There's the view from the other side. Those had to be replaced. They both go all the way over to the other side, including that one. Unfortunately, on that back one, that was the first one I did, and boy, I was a little new to it, and it went in a little bit crooked, like tilted forward. So I don't think it'll make much difference in the long run, but I'd rather have done a better job of it. Anyway, those two in the back, and then you can see here, these are small, very small bulkheads. I don't even know if they're really bulkheads. They were maybe just meant to support the piece of plywood that runs along here in this this berth. This is meant to be a berth here. So sorry about the angles. It's hard to back up enough to show you a full picture. Maybe if I turn it sideways here. Sorry for the change. But anyway, yeah, you can see on each side there's this berth, and I put these in copies of the old ones, but instead of just putting a tiny little bit of tabbing on the side, I just put them in like a stringer. And so that's done. And then obviously the same thing on this side. I have these two. I'll try to back up. Okay. And then there's a piece of plywood that's going to go over the top of this, like a cabin top. There's nothing that goes over the tops of the bulkheads in the rear. So then looking forward, I replaced these two, which were this, and then this big one in the middle here. This big one supports the compression posts to the mast beam. And it also, these will have sort of tops and sides that will form a kind of cabinet. So those are in, and then I just finished putting this one in up front here. So that's drying or curing as we speak. And then the one I have left is up front there. It's a sort of what you would see in a chain locker, except that on the Cal 20 there's no opening on the deck to feed chain through, so I'm not really sure what it was meant to be, but I'm going to replace it. They all needed to be replaced. And then you can probably see this whole area is the V-berth, and it's going to need plywood over top. So that's it though. That'll be the last bulkhead, which I'm really happy to report. And then I meant to show you guys, you can see hopefully you can see that. That's the teak wood that supports the compression posts from that side. So anyway, if you're wondering, I don't know if I'm on screen here, but hopefully. If you're wondering, I had to replace all of them. All the bulkheads were rotten. Some were so bad that I could just pull them out with my hand. I didn't even have to cut through the tabbing. Others took a little more work to get out, but the wood was gone. The cabin tops on both, you know, the front, the V-berth tops might have been salvageable, but I couldn't get them out in one piece to replace the bulkheads, because cutting through the tabbing that close to the hull. Here, I'll show you. So they were tabbed in to the hull. Those of you who are familiar with the Cal 20, you know there's no cabin liner, it's just the hull. And this thing, which I'm sitting in, this is the closest, this is the only other piece of fiberglass except the deck and the hull. So, I'm going to hopefully finish that one up. That'll take a couple days. I'll come back tomorrow when all this is cured and cut that out, cut a new piece, do all the prep, grind it, and then tab the new one in. And then after that, I'm going to move on to this spot right here. The companionway hatch slider tends to, the part of the deck that supports this up top tends to crack, which it did, and then it lets water into the deck. So I've got rotten plywood here, But as far as I can tell, it doesn't go that far. It kind of comes down about to here. So hopefully I won't have to replace too much. And then I need to check the deck under that backing plate, because you can see there's some rust on the bolts there, which means there was water coming through. And possibly this one, although it looks better. And then the ones on this side and this side look pretty decent. So I'm crossing my fingers there's no rot there. Once that's done, I still need to do a few things inside. I need to put cockpit drains in, since the inboard engine well was, or the outboard well in the cockpit was glassed over. And I can talk a little bit about how I did the bulkheads. And so I used maybe a little bit more robust construction, which I don't know if it was necessary, but I'll show you. So I used 8 inches of tabbing for 4 on each side. I put these in with a fillet, and I didn't try to leave a gap between the wood and the hull, because I figured I had the fillet there to make this into essentially a nice big piece of epoxy that spreads out the whole load. And the wood itself is just regular exterior grade BC plywood, but I've sealed it all in with usually 3 layers of epoxy. So I just painted 3 layers of epoxy resin onto the wood, scrubbed off the amine blush, sanded it, and then stuck it in. So, and you can see, if you look real close here, you can see where it's, you know, some of the kind of drips. I didn't try to sand those down perfectly. I didn't see any need to. So, yeah, if I had that to do over again, I might have just gone with marine grade plywood. I'm aware that it's not fundamentally different or anything, but the expense and the time involved in taking, you know, coating every single piece of wood with epoxy, 3 layers. I mean, it's hours and hours of time for each one, and I wouldn't do it again. I would just use marine grade and know that it'd have to be done again at some point, you know, I think. So anyway, that's basically the update. I did a little bit of stuff to the transom. I can show you guys that, so hang on a sec. Come on with me and we'll go look out back, and I'll show you what I did. Don't mind the cockpit, it's a mess right now. Okay. So you can hopefully see I laid up fiberglass 10-ounce cloth, I think 3 or 5 layers of 10-ounce over the front of the transom here, that little lip, and I'll show you, they wrap around to the back. I know this is about the worst camera work you can imagine, so I apologize. The main point of all this is just for anybody else who has one. Okay, so you can see here, I wrapped it around to the side underneath where the rub rail starts. And it's white because I have a layer of gel coat on that I just sanded smooth. I put an extra, I think 3 or 5 layers here in the middle, because this is going to support the gudgeons, I think, the pintles, gudgeons for the rudder. One goes up here. I'm going to bolt it through to the lip, so I'm going to have it a little higher than it was. And then the other one's down here. This isn't below the water line. I just bottom painted. I just raised the water line when I bottom painted. And then I'm going to, you know, that was polyester, so I'm just going to gel coat that. That was another project. So the reason I did that is that the transom wasn't actually connected. It was riveted to a piece of wood that was tabbed in back here underneath this. And I can tell you there's no access to it. It's the only bit of rotten wood I didn't tear out of the boat, because it is absolutely impossible to get to. And some of it was okay, so I couldn't just pull it out, and so I didn't want to bother too much So what I'm going to do is anything that needs to be mounted back here is just going to be bolted through to the other side of into the cockpit. And so anyway, the transom had been riveted into that wood, but obviously the wood rotted and the rivets weren't holding anymore. And so the cockpit just ended here, and then the transom ended here, and they fit together, but you could push this hard enough to like move the transom where it's not connected to the cockpit. And the seam was just covered over by a small piece of aluminum. So I took the aluminum off and just glassed this over. Hopefully that'll hold. And then some of the bolts that I'm going to put through to mount stuff should act as some reinforcement to that. I'm going to inject some thickened epoxy into the holes wherever I go and hopefully create little compression posts. But we'll see how that turns out, because I don't know. It would need some rotten wood in there to hold the thickened epoxy in place while it cures. And in any case, that's where we are. I'm about a month away from needing to launch this. I'm going to be moving on to it. And so I'm trying to pick up the pace a little bit. We'll see how it goes. After replacing that bit of rotten deck and getting all the hardware back in, a few little things to do. I'm going to paint the inside, obviously, and rebed as much of the deck hardware as I can. Replace the old plywood backing plates with some G10, but after that, I need to build the rigging. I've got the mast up here, and I've had all the wire, the swages on the wire were showing some rust and discoloration. So rather than do all this work and then rig it up and have the rigging fail, I'm going to replace it myself. I'm going to go a size up, and that's about it for now. Kind of rambling on at this point, but again, the point of these videos is if you're like me, you have a Cal 20 and you're trying to figure out what to do, and nobody else has one. I mean, these are pretty common in Florida and the Pacific Northwest. California, Pacific Northwest. I'm in Florida. I've never seen a single Cal 20 around here. In fact, I bought this one from New Jersey, and that's going to be the subject of another video, why you should never ever buy a project boat, ever. I have sunk so much money and time into this. I could have spent 40 grand on a boat at this point for a $3,000 boat. So that'll be another video. Fingers crossed, when I get this in the water and it floats, I'm going to talk about what a tremendous mistake it was, rather than not just getting a second job and saving my money for a year or two. So anyway, hopefully a more cheerful video next time, but you guys take it easy and feel free to put questions in the comments.